Thanks, President Seth. It truly is my pleasure to introduce Colonel Joe Rice as our speaker today. And I do have to thank Ed Crabtree for suggesting that I contact him. In getting ready to introduce Joe, I decided to go and Google Joe Rice, and I was very surprised to see that he has his own Wikipedia page, so his online encyclopedia page. I have nothing like that, so anyway. And then Joe proceeded to tell me that at one point he had someone stalking him via Wikipedia. And I think we solved mystery because shortly after that, Alice Bullwinkle kept saying, "Now you're the one that did this, right? And you did that." And so I think we solved a great mystery here today. But please join me in welcoming Colonel Joe Rice.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here to speak to your club, as well as to speak before many members of Trinity United Methodist Church, where I go to church. So I'm a pastor, and several folks from the church are here. So let me get right into our topic, so hopefully we can save plenty of time for questions and discussion. I do want to say that this is, of course, my personal opinion. I'll give you what my experiences are, things as I see it, and conclusions kind of from my vantage point. And obviously there are other vantage points, and there's also room for discussion on a lot of this, of course. Try to move down here. See if I can speak from here. Right here. Okay, here we go. I have been in Iraq 5 times, and I'll just give you the brief summary of this. Started at the beginning when I was there. I was deployed for about 15 months and in Iraq for about a year. And my job primarily was to work with the Baghdad City Council, conducting actually a series of small elections throughout the city of Baghdad, because we didn't have time to do full-blown elections with voter registration and all that. But it nonetheless was a democratic caucus where people in the neighborhoods elected people up to various levels that ended up with the Baghdad City Council. And I served as kind of their advisor and liaison for that. I was then home for about a year and a half, then went back for 6 months, and my job, both this time as well as the next time that I went to Iraq, was to go out with various units, mostly in Baghdad, spend a few days or maybe a week or so with them to see and advise them on interactions with the Iraqi people, with the Iraqi police, with the Iraqi elected officials, and also to gather lessons learned and send those back to the Army. One of the things I would go out on the street if I saw how the Iraqi police and how the U.S. soldiers were out doing a checkpoint one day, I would write up how that checkpoint was operating, the things that happened at that checkpoint, email it back to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and actually within a day or two even, several those scenarios were being used in training for units that were getting ready to go to Iraq, so they had real-time current situations. I was at home again for about a year and a half. I went back in 2009. This was actually a pretty optimistic period. Violence was down, cooperation was high, and we saw a lot of good prospects for Iraq for the future. And then was home again for about a year and a half, and then went back last year, so actually about a year ago, to work on, during the phase of withdrawal, where the bulk of troops were withdrawn. Remember, all U.S. troops went out of Iraq this last December. So I was there for the last year of that withdrawal, and really looking at how to set up partnerships and exchanges and other things that would go beyond the withdrawal of U.S. forces. Obviously would still be engaged diplomatically, as well as are there exercises or other types of partnerships that we could be involved with the Iraqi military, as well as other kind of aspects with the Iraqi security forces, the Iraqi police, and frankly, different government institutions in Iraq and organizations here in the United States, trying to work on setting those things up. So let me now, that's kind of the history, my history there in Iraq. And so now this is an article from October of 2011, so a few months ago, when it was announced that all U.S. troops would in fact be coming home by December of 2011. There would not be a follow-on force. There had been discussions about keeping a follow-on force in Iraq. I will tell you my personal opinion is that would have been a bad idea. I think we want to still have a relationship with Iraq, but I'll get to something here in a little bit that talks about why we kind of needed, the U.S. and the Iraqis, really kind of needed a clean break, if you will. But I wanted to point out this phrase right here. This is from this article, and it describes what I think is really the opinion of virtually, And it sounds conflicting, and it is conflicting, but actually in many ways it describes exactly kind of their dilemmas as they look to their new era going forward. The Iraqis wanted American troops, the occupiers, to go, but they wanted American troops, the protectors, to stay. I really think that sums up literally the kind of complex nature of our relationship. And then down here, let me just point out that it says here, now many fear an increased level of violence, growing Iranian influence, and political turmoil. And I'm sorry to say, this is one article here that came out in January that talked about the Sunnis are starting to kind of self-ethnic cleanse, if you will, get out of mixed neighborhoods, which is something that also happened amongst the various groups during the height of the violence. And really, again, I mentioned 2009, 2008, 2009, 2010, really kind of being a pretty good period where it looked like there was a lot of kind of reconciliation and a lot of those conflicts that we saw during the height of the violence had calmed down. The violence is not yet increased to anywhere near the levels it was, again, during and before the surge. And I'll show you a chart of the levels of violence here in a moment. But it is, you're starting to see some not good signs. One of them is a couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister, Maliki's government, a Shia-dominated government, because they're the majority of the population in Iraq, issued an arrest warrant for the Sunni vice president. And then I put on your tables today an article that was in today's Philadelphia Inquirer about a friend of mine, somebody who actually has been here to the Denver area in the past on some exchanges that we've had. The Rotary has been involved with several of the Rotary clubs in the Denver metro area here. He was arrested recently. Very concerned about him, but just a couple of passages here in the article, I think, explain fairly well some of the challenges that Iraq is facing here. So Dr. Riyad is his name, and I'm quoting from the article, his case appears to be part of an effort by Shiite Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki to repress and marginalize Sunnis, including elected officials, to monopolize power. Down that road lies chaos, sectarian war, and the reemergence of Islamic extremists, including al-Qaeda. This is a very bad sign. Not only am I worried about it personally, not only, frankly, I'm worried about the bond with the Iraqi people. It means something to me, as it does, I think, so many other people who've served there or known other people who've served there. We care about the Iraqis. We care about our national security and the implications that an unstable Iraq could have for not only the Iraqi people, but for our country as well. Let me step back now and kind of recap a little bit of how we got here and give a little bit of history and perspective for where the Iraqis can try to go next. I got the name The Lost Year from a PBS Frontline episode that came out in 2004. And it really describes, I think very well, if you have time, you can find it on the internet. I actually encourage you to watch it. It really talks about how we did lose a lot of opportunities in Iraq. The short version of this is that as a nation, we did not really know whether we were going to invade, depose Saddam Hussein, and then leave, or whether we were going to stay. And I would like to say there's some good implications to this if it's done right. Nation building is hard, it's complex, it's controversial, but I also think there are many cases around the world where to stop civil wars and has led to some great degree of stability and prosperity was a good thing to do. I'll throw out Bosnia as an example of that. But the lost year, we kind of had a foot in both worlds. And as such, we lost a lot of opportunities. I almost think that if you're not going to commit to staying and doing some nation building, then get out quickly and let them figure it out, because we interfered enough to not let the Iraqis develop a new way, but we didn't interfere enough to establish a new way. So we kept them from figuring out how they wanted to do it, but yet we weren't really giving them any guidance either. And we can talk about later questions perhaps about can you impose democracy and all these other things. I know it has to be a bottoms-up process, but you also need an honest broker when you're coming out of 35 years of dictatorship, and you need some stability.